Individual self-interest can undermine the collective good.
Exactly.
And Williams uses some interesting examples to illustrate this point, right?
He does. He talks about how resource-rich countries like Australia have been resistant to phasing out fossil fuels because they want to protect jobs and economic stability.
Even though those short-term gains come at the expense of the long-term health of the planet.
Exactly.
It's a classic example of how difficult it is to get countries to put global needs ahead of their own national interests.
And then there's the issue of bringing developing nations on board.
Right, because their argument is that they shouldn't be held to the same standards as developed countries who have contributed the most to the problem,
Right.
historically.
It's a complex ethical dilemma.
It is.
And it's a major sticking point in these international climate negotiations.
So how do we get everyone on the same page?
It's a tough question, and Generation Nero doesn't pretend to have all the answers. But it does suggest that we need to move beyond these traditional models of international diplomacy.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, Williams argues for finding new ways to foster cooperation and build trust. We need to create a more equitable and just global system, where the needs of developing countries are taken into account, and where the benefits of a clean energy transition are shared more widely.
It's a tall order, but it's clear that the current system is not working.
It's not. We need a new approach.
And Williams also highlights the role of non-state actors, like cities, businesses, and civil society organizations.
Yeah, they can play a crucial role in driving climate action.
So it's about recognizing that change can happen from the bottom up.
As well as from the top-down grassroots movements, citizen activism, and local initiatives. All of that can play a crucial role in pushing for change.
And holding leaders accountable.
Exactly.
And demonstrating that a different way is possible.
Generation Nero emphasizes that individual actions, when multiplied across millions of people, can have a transformative impact.
So even small choices matter.
They do what we buy, how we get around, how much energy we use.
It's about being the change we want to see in the world.
Exactly, and Generation Nero provides a roadmap for how we can do that.
So we've talked about international cooperation, individual action, but sometimes it feels like we're past the point of no return. Generation Nero actually dedicates a whole chapter to this question. Have we already crossed those critical climate thresholds?
It's one of the most difficult parts of the book to read, but also one of the most important.
So what's the verdict?
Well, Williams presents evidence that suggests we may have already triggered some irreversible changes.
Like a runaway train we can't stop.
Well, it's not quite that simple. Even if we've crossed certain thresholds, it doesn't mean that we should just give up. It just means that we need to work even harder to mitigate further damage and adapt to the changes that are already happening.
So it's not about despair. It's about urgency.
Exactly. We need to accept the reality of where we are, but also recognize that we still have a role to play in shaping the future.
Okay, so what are some of those tipping points that we might have already crossed?
Well, the book dives into some pretty alarming scientific findings, like the melting of the polar ice caps. It's happening at an unprecedented rate, and it's a major contributor to rising sea levels.
Which threatens coastal communities around the world.
Exactly, and it's something we're already seeing the impacts of, with more frequent and intense coastal flooding.
And it's only going to get worse.
It is, and what's really worrying is that this melting is happening much faster than scientists predicted.
Oh, no.
Which suggests that we may have underestimated the sensitivity of these ice sheets to warming.
So the situation is even more urgent than we thought.
It's a possibility we have to consider.
And it's not just the ice caps, right?
No, Williams also talks about ocean acidification. As the ocean absorbs more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it becomes more acidic, and that has a devastating impact on marine ecosystems.
It's like we're conducting this giant chemistry experiment on the planet.
And the results are not good.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that climate change doesn't just impact one part of the planet. It affects every interconnected system.
And then there's the alarming rate of biodiversity loss.
Yes, driven by habitat destruction, climate change, pollution. It's a whole combination of factors.
It's heartbreaking to think about all the species we're losing.
It is, and we're currently experiencing extinction rates comparable to those of past mass extinction events.
So we're living through the 6th mass extinction.
Essentially, yes, and it's largely driven by human activity.
Wow.
It's a sobering realization, but Generation Nero also emphasizes that it's not too late to change course.
Okay.
It's not about giving up. It's about recognizing the urgency and doing everything we can to prevent the worst-case scenarios from becoming reality.
So we've talked about these climate thresholds we might have already crossed. But Generation Nero also digs into the consequences of neglecting the environment.
It's a powerful reminder of why all of this matters so much.
So what are some of those consequences?
Well, the book chronicles this increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters.
Wildfires, hurricanes, floods.
Exactly.
These are images that we're seeing more and more in the news.
And they're increasingly hard to ignore.
And Williams stresses that these aren't just random events.
They're part of a disturbing trend that's only going to get worse as the planet keeps warming.
The 20 warmest years on record have all happened in the last 22 years.
It's crazy how quickly the planet is warming.
It really is.
And Generation Nero explains the science behind it. Rising temperatures alter weather patterns, intensify storms, increase the risk of droughts and heat waves.
It's like this domino effect.
It is one change triggers another, leading to this cascade of impacts.
But we're not helpless.
We're not.
We have the knowledge and the tools to address these challenges.
We do.
So it's about taking that knowledge and creating a more resilient future.
Exactly. And Williams highlights some inspiring examples of communities and countries that are taking proactive steps to adapt to the changing climate.
Like building seawalls.
Yeah.
Developing drought-resistant crops.
Exactly.
Creating early warning systems.
It's about being proactive rather than reactive.
It's a call to action.
It is.
But it's not just about adaptation. There's also the issue of mitigation.
Right. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the first place.
Which is really the root of the problem.
It is. And Generation Nero dives into a whole range of strategies for doing that. From transitioning to renewable energy, to promoting sustainable agriculture, to protecting forests.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is. We need to pursue all of these strategies simultaneously.
One of the things that really struck me about Generation Nero was this contrast that Williams draws between those who are profiting from environmental destruction and those who are bearing the brunt of the consequences.
It's a powerful reminder that climate change isn't just an environmental issue.
It's a social justice issue.
Exactly.
It's about fairness.
And Williams is very clear about this injustice at the heart of the climate crisis. The people who have contributed the least to the problem, the poor, the marginalized, those living in developing countries, they're often the ones hit the hardest.
So it makes the need to act even more urgent. So how is climate change making things worse for those who are already struggling?
Well, Williams talks about how climate change is pushing millions of people into poverty, displacing communities from their homes, and fueling conflict over scarce resources.
It's a recipe for instability.
It is.
Yeah.
And suffering. But the book also offers solutions. Williams suggests we need a fundamental shift in the way we think about development and consumption and our relationship with the planet.
So a more sustainable and compassionate way of life.
Exactly. And he highlights examples of communities and individuals around the world who are already living in this way, demonstrating that a different future is possible.
Those stories are so important. It's easy to get overwhelmed. But it's good to remember that people are already finding ways to adapt.
They are, and we can all be part of that change.
Yeah.
It starts with recognizing our own complicity and making choices that align with our values.
Choosing to be part of the solution.
Exact.
Generation Nero also explores the socioeconomic repercussions of climate change. These everyday impacts.
Right. It highlights how climate change is not just this abstract concept. It's a reality that's affecting people's lives in very real ways.
So what are some of those everyday impacts?
Well, Williams talks about the economic costs of natural disasters, which are becoming increasingly frequent and severe.
Billions of dollars in damage.
Exactly. Businesses destroyed, livelihoods lost.
And those costs are felt most acutely by those who can least afford them.
They are the poorer, the marginalized, those in developing countries. They often lack the resources to rebuild and recover.
So climate change exacerbates poverty, and poverty makes communities more vulnerable.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle.
And then there's climate-induced migration.
Millions of people are already being displaced.
Millions.
Fleeing rising sea levels, droughts, floods.
And it's only going to get worse as the planet continues to warm.
It's a humanitarian crisis in the making.
It is, and one that's going to require a coordinated global response.
So we need to be proactive.
We do.
And compassionate.
Recognizing the human cost of climate change.
And taking steps to alleviate the suffering.
Exactly. And then there's resource scarcity.
As the climate changes, it's putting pressure on water and agricultural land.
It is.
And that competition can lead to conflict.
Exactly. Williams highlights some worrying examples, like the conflict over water rights in the Nile River Basin,
where Ethiopia's dam is closing tension with Egypt and Sudan.
It's a reminder that climate change is a threat multiplier.
It makes existing problems worse.
It does.
And it creates new challenges.
And it highlights the need for proactive solutions. We need to promote cooperation, invest in sustainable resource management, and build peace-building mechanisms.
So it's not just about reducing emissions, it's about creating a more just and peaceful world.
Exactly, and it's about addressing the root causes of the problem, which lie in our current economic and political systems.
Generation Nero makes a really powerful case for a fundamental shift in the way we think about all of this.
It does.
Security development, our relationship with the planet.
It really does.
So we've talked about the consequences of climate change. But I really admire how Williams doesn't just point out our failures, he also challenges us to learn from them.
Yeah, he believes in our capacity for growth and change.
It's easy to get caught up in all the doom and gloom, but Generation Nero really pushes us to learn from our past mistakes.
It's about owning our responsibility without getting stuck in guilt or blame.
And there's a whole chapter that analyzes what's contributed to our failure to act.
There is.
So what are some of those factors?
Well, Williams looks at case studies where climate interventions succeeded or failed.
Looking for patterns.
Exactly. And the book highlights some key lessons we can learn.
Like what?
Well, one of the big takeaways is the importance of strong leadership and effective governance. Political will can make or break climate action.
We've seen that play out.
We have.
Time and time again.
And he highlights some inspiring examples of countries that have made great strides.
Because their leaders prioritize sustainability.
Exactly, but leadership doesn't just come from politicians.
It comes from individuals.
It does.
Business
communities.
Yeah.
Generation Nero emphasizes public engagement and education,
Raising awareness.
empowering individuals.
Building a movement.
And Williams argues we need to move beyond traditional models of education and find new ways to engage people on an emotional level.
So connect the climate crisis to their values.
Exactly. Their experiences, their aspirations.
And stories.
Build relationships, create a sense of shared purpose.
And shift the way we talk about climate change.
Yeah, away from just dry scientific data and towards narratives that resonate with people's lives.
Make it personal.
Make it relatable.
Make it relevant.
Exactly, if we want to mobilize the collective action we need.
Okay, so we've talked about learning from our mistakes, leadership, public engagement.
Yeah.
But is there still hope?
That's the big question. It is a question that a lot of people are asking these days, and Williams doesn't shy away from it. He dedicates a whole chapter to exploring this question of, is there still hope?
It would be so easy to just give in to despair after reading all this,
It would.
But I really appreciate that Williams doesn't stop there. He really commits to exploring solutions.
Yeah, he really believes in our capacity for growth and change, even when we've made mistakes.
He highlights the resilience of the human spirit.
He does our capacity for innovation, and he backs it up with real-world examples of progress.
Okay, so what are some of those solutions that give Williams hope?
Well, one of the biggest things he focuses on is the growth of renewable energy. Think about how quickly solar and wind power have become cost competitive with fossil fuels.
It's pretty amazing how fast things are changing in that sector.
It is, and not that long ago they were considered niche technologies. And now they're becoming mainstream.
And Williams talks about countries like Denmark and Germany as real leaders in this transition.
They're showing the world that it's possible to shift to a clean energy future.
And it's not just about those big national level projects, right?
No, individual actions matter too. Even something as simple as installing solar panels on your roof or switching to a green energy provider.
It's about becoming part of the solution.
Yeah.
And then there's energy efficiency and conservation.
Right.
Which sometimes I think gets overlooked.
It does.
But it's so important.
It is. The greenest energy is the energy we don't use.
Exactly.
So making small changes in our daily lives, using energy efficient appliances, driving less, being mindful of our consumption.
It all adds up.
It does.
What about the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing, though?
Yeah.
Even if we reduce emissions, we're still going to have to deal with a warmer planet for years to come.
That's true. And Williams acknowledges that adaptation is going to be just as important as mitigation.
So we've got to prepare for the changes that are already happening.
Exactly. Things like seawalls to protect coastal communities from rising sea levels and drought-resistant crops.
So being proactive.
Yeah.
But where do we even begin?
Well, Williams emphasizes these community-based adaptation strategies, empowering local communities to develop solutions that work for them.
Because there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
There isn't. The people who are most affected are often the best equipped to come up with solutions.
It's about listening to those communities.
Yeah, and supporting their efforts.
And what about the role of technology in all of this?
Oh, technology is huge. Williams believes that innovation and technology are crucial for finding new ways to cope with the challenges of a warming world.
So developing new drought-resistant crops,
Right.
designing efficient irrigation systems.
Early warning systems for extreme weather.
It's about using our ingenuity.
Yeah, finding solutions.
It's not just about doom and gloom. It's about using our creativity to create a future where we can thrive.
Exactly. And it requires a shift in mindset, a
Yeah.
willingness to embrace change and work together.
But all this comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Generation Nero really digs into the cost of inaction.
It does both the economic and ethical implications.
So if we continue down this path,
Yeah.
what are we looking at?
Well, one of the most alarming projections is that climate change could push over 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030.
Wow.
Millions of lives disrupted, millions of people struggling to survive.
Climate change is a human rights issue,
It is a social justice issue.
a moral imperative to act.
And Williams also talks about the health impacts. Things like heat-related illnesses, the spread of infectious diseases, the mental health toll of living with this constant threat.
It's easy to overlook those more invisible impacts,
It is.
but they're real.
They are, and these costs are already being felt around the world, and they're only going to get worse.
So the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of taking action.
Exactly. And Williams goes beyond just the economic cost.
Yeah.
He talks about the ethical implications of passing on a degraded planet to future generations.
What kind of legacy are we leaving behind? Are we the generation that knew but didn't act?
That's the question that Generation Nero really poses.
It's a powerful question.
It is, and while the book acknowledges the challenges, it also offers a message of hope.
So we still have time to act.
We do. We have the power to change course.
The choices we make today will determine the future.
That's right.
It's not about giving up. It's about taking responsibility, embracing hope, and working together to create a better world.
A world where both humanity and nature can thrive.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into Generation Nero, Burning the Future. It's a powerful book.
It is an important one.
And to our listeners, we really encourage you to check it out. It's available in all sorts of formats, so there's really no excuse not to. We hope this deep dive has given you a taste of what Williams has to offer.
It's a book that will stay with you,
It will.
and it has the potential to change the way we think about the world.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, the climate crisis is a challenge that we can overcome if we work together, if we embrace hope, and if we never stop believing in our ability to create a better future.
A future where both humanity and nature can thrive.
Thanks for listening.